All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at something that is honestly deeply personal for a lot of you out there. I want to talk directly to that incredibly heavy, just exhausting feeling of having to always be the reliable one. You know the type, right? The person who never drops the ball, the one who literally always has the answer, the one everyone else just leans on. Now, if you've spent your entire life cultivating this completely flawless track record, you probably think you're just doing what's required to succeed. But what if that identity isn't actually your personality at all? What if it's, well, a trap? You've definitely been there before, lying awake at 2 a.m., just staring at the ceiling, replaying a completely normal, everyday conversation for like the 10th time. And why? Because you were desperately trying to find the right angle to make it all make sense. You're analyzing it to ensure you came across absolutely perfectly. It's this incredibly painful midnight anxiety, but you know what? You probably just rush it off. You probably just tell yourself you're being thorough or, just being highly responsible. But here is the absolute gut punch reality of the situation. You aren't a high achiever. You're surviving. Everyone else looks at you and sees this person who always has it together, but on the inside, it feels like you're running a very expensive, incredibly complex piece of software that is literally constantly on the verge of crashing. You are maintaining a system that requires just a monumental amount of energy simply to keep the lights on. So let's look at how this starts. Section 1, the gifted child trap, a map of love. We tend to think that being the good kid or the smart one was this huge head start in life, right? Like it was this amazing advantage. But it really wasn't. It was an inherited survival strategy. You didn't consciously choose this personality. You adopted it before you even had the vocabulary to question it. Why? Because you learned super early on that being gifted and being useful was the only map of love you were ever going to get. The legendary psychologist Carl Jung actually defined this exact phenomenon as the persona. Think of it as a theatrical mask, a mask worn specifically to be legible and acceptable to the people who controlled your early survival. For the gifted child, that mask was constructed entirely out of competence, perfection, and just the total suppression of any messy, inconvenient human needs. You built it simply to earn survival-level love. Which leads us perfectly into Section 2. Your persona is a prison and the loss of the true self. The major problem with a highly effective survival mechanism is that over time, the mask actually starts to wear you. You stop being a person who happens to have a career, and you sort of morph into a career with a person attached to it. The persona goes from being this helpful tool you use to navigate the world to a literal prison that locks away who you actually are. There is this massive disconnect between the myth and the reality of the high achiever. On one side, look at how the world sees you. Reliable, high-achieving, always perfect. They applaud you for it. But how does Carl Jung see you? He sees someone who is defensive, unindividuated, and protecting the childhood wound. He recognized that this flawless exterior, it isn't genuine success at all. It's a defensive formation designed to keep you safe, but at the cost of your actual soul. That childhood wound just hasn't been allowed to speak since you were a kid. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what you're actually missing out on. Jung called this individuation. Individuation is the development of a genuine, completely separate self, rather than simply fulfilling a predetermined role for everyone else. Staying stuck in that gifted trap, that represents a complete failure of individuation. Your entire identity has been built around being needed by others, rather than actually being known for who you truly are. And that takes a huge toll. Section 3, the cost of perfection and the mechanics of exhaustion. This psychological trap literally changes the way your physical brain processes everyday decisions. Let's walk through what psychologists call the System 2 draft. Step 1. Because you are absolutely terrified of making a mistake and losing that safe, gifted status, your brain just goes into overdrive. Step 2. You end up drafting your System 2 mind. Now, System 2 is the slow, highly deliberate, and incredibly energy-expensive part of your brain. You're using this heavy mental machinery to handle total trivialities. What to eat, what to wear, how to phrase a basic text message. And why do you do this? Well, Step 3 explains it perfectly. You actively distrust anything that arrives without effort. If it isn't difficult, you just don't trust it. And the inevitable result of all that constant overthinking, ego depletion. This is when you spend your absolute sharpest mental energy on total trivialities. So by the time decisions that actually matter finally show up, you are left completely, utterly empty. I really want to emphasize this for anyone watching who feels constantly burnt out. Listen to me. You are not lazy. You are simply running on fumes because your gifted mask absolutely refuses to let you rest. It demands constant, hypervigilant energy from you all the time. Quick aside before we move on to how we actually fix this. If what we've covered so far is hitting a nerve, like if you really recognize that your identity has been built purely around being needed, I want to highlight a couple of resources for deeper work. I've put together 2 ebooks, Beyond the Shadow, which breaks down Jung's core architecture, and Dialogues with the Unconscious, which is a really practical 30-day guide to starting this work yourself. Both of those are linked right in the pinned comment below this explainer. Okay, moving on to Section 4, Confronting Your Shadow and the Mechanics of Self-Sabotage. This brings us to arguably the hardest, most confusing part of carrying around this gifted identity. What exactly happens to all the parts of yourself that you had to bury to keep that mask perfect? Where do they go? Well, they go into what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is essentially everything about yourself you had to bury to maintain the persona. Now, people hear shadow and think it's all bad stuff. It includes your anger, sure, but it also includes your playfulness, your spontaneity, your most genuine desires. The shadow isn't evil at all, but because these incredibly genuine parts of you have been locked away in the dark, whenever you actually get close to the authentic life you really want, it triggers massive self-sabotage. So why on earth do we self-sabotage when we're close to what we want? It's because of the symbolic death of the perfect child. You see, achieving genuine, authentic success requires the death of that old, perfectly accommodating persona. And your ego? Your ego experiences this symbolic death as literal, total annihilation. It freaks out. So it manufactures a crisis. It gives you a highly logical reason to just walk away, all to keep you safe in your familiar, comfortable suffering. So how do we break out of this cycle? Let's dive into Section 5, Taking Off the Mask, the Path to Liberation. Look, the way out is not about finding a better, more efficient mask. It's about finally dismantling the heavy one you've worn your entire life. Jung suggested a very concrete tool for this, which he called active imagination. This is the practice of speaking directly to the terrified parts of your psyche instead of fighting them. Rather than repressing all that anxiety that flares up when you aren't being perfect, you actually turn toward it. You engage with it. So here is how you actually practice this in real life. Step 1. When that intense fear of failing hits, don't fight it. Step 2. Actually ask the fear, what are you protecting me from? If you sit with it and listen closely, you'll almost always find this ancient, highly specific fear that if you aren't perfect, you will be abandoned. And once you recognize that fear for exactly what it is, you can move to Step 3, deliberately withdraw care from the expectations of others. You literally have to actively choose to stop optimizing your life for what everyone else wants you to be. I'm going to be completely straight with you. This process, it will not be comfortable. Real transformation is the literal dissolution of your current self. It's not some simple self-improvement trick or a neat little productivity hack. You're going to have to actually grieve the gifted child you thought you were in order to finally become the person you actually are. Choosing to be real over being safe is an incredibly brave act. Because it all really comes down to this idea from Jung. The goal isn't to be happy, it's to be real. Happiness is fleeting, right? And when you chase it through the lens of a persona, it's totally artificial anyway. Being real, integrating that shadow, finally taking off the mask, that is where true meaning and actual peace are found. So I want to leave you with a question to really reflect on. What pattern do you recognize in yourself? If something in this explainer felt like looking directly into a mirror today, I want you to drop a comment below. And don't just tell me what you think of the psychological concepts, I want to know what you recognized about your own specific patterns. Because honestly, by identifying it and simply by being here and engaging with this material, the hard work of taking off the mask has already begun. Thanks so much for hanging out and learning with me today.